Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Triangulation is brought to you by Cashfly at CACHEFLY.com. This is Triangulation, episode 212, recorded Monday, August 10th, 2015. Jono Bacon. Triangulation is brought to you by Next Issue, the mobile app that lets you access the world's most popular magazines anytime, anywhere, using your phone or tablet. For your free 30-day trial, visit nextissue.com/triangulation. And by Prosper. Prosper is a peer-to-peer lending marketplace that connects people who are looking to borrow money with those who have money to lend. Visit prosper.com/twit and receive a $50 Visa gift card when you get a loan. It's time for Triangulation, the show where we talk to some of the most interesting people in tech. It's kind of the in-depth show, and lots of big ideas and lots of big people, and I'm thrilled to get an old friend on who, it's a timely interview. Jono Bacon is formerly the community manager at Ubuntu. How long were you there?
Just under 8 years.
Long time.
Long time.
And almost really from the beginning of it.
Yeah. I joined about a year and a half after the project kicked off. So.
And it really kind of got in a high gear during your tenure there.
It was, it was eclectic.
People who watch our Floss Weekly show will remember Jono as a regular on that show.
Yeah.
Regular host on that show. He also is the author of a very good book with an excellent foreword.
Excellent foreword.
One of the best forewords.
Best ever, yeah.
Called The Art of Community. An expert on community. He's now doing the same for a little thing you might have heard of called XPrize, the XPrize Foundation, that gives money. Peter Diamandis founded it and runs it. Yeah. Gives money for big things.
Yeah, I mean, the basic principle of it is that Peter wrote a book called Abundance.
Yeah.
And his philosophy is that you can solve all of the major problems in the world with technology. That technology is doubling every year, it's exponential. And XPrize basically has these really large competitions to incentivize teams to solve market failures, whether it's education or it's space travel or whether it's medicine or whatever it might be.
I think we probably are, most of our audience is aware of the XPrize for space.
Right.
But there's other things.
Yeah, I mean, just before I went over there, I was under the impression it was primarily space-oriented, and it's actually, I mean, so for example, we launched a $15 million global learning XPrize competition, which challenges teams to build an Android app that teaches kids how to read, write, and do arithmetic.
Oh, that's so cool.
And there's one to build a tricorder, Star Trek fans will be familiar with. And then there's Oceans Initiatives, there's all kinds of
tons of stuff. I'm looking at this, I can't believe how much stuff.
Yeah.
So it's interesting, because Peter probably, I'm guessing, and we had him on the show a few months ago, I should have asked him this, could have been a venture capitalist and funded those kinds of projects. But I think he was smart. Instead, he takes the same amount of money and instead says, let's have a competition.
Well, what's interesting about it is that he's, when I first met him, the first thing that struck me about him was that he's primarily the architect of a vision of a philosophy.
Brilliant man.
And he articulated it perfectly in Abundance, but then he is one of the most well-networked people I've ever met, and he's got an unbelievable talent at getting people to give him money. So the people who fund these prizes, the people who fund the work of the XPrize Foundation, they do it because they believe in his mission and his ethos. And he's got his finger in a bunch of different pies as well, like he is a co-founder of a company that's basically looking to mine asteroids.
Yeah, that's what we talked a lot about. Yeah,
so Planetary Resources, and a company that's trying to increase human longevity to 200. Neat. So, yeah.
It's neat when somebody has a big vision like that. People
science fiction is science fact in Peter's world.
Yeah. Elon Musk, Peter Diamandis, there's just certain people who really are thinking bigger than I do. But I brought you here because we wanted to talk about community and its challenges.
Yes.
And you have spent more time than anybody thinking about it, and not just doing it, but thinking about it and what makes it work and what makes it not work. And it first came to mind when Reddit had its recent issues, which I think are ongoing.
Right.
And I thought, this is a really good example of something that was built as a business, but was really a community.
Yeah.
Dig is another great example, and Dig, of course, had a kind of massive meltdown because they didn't handle community. When did you start thinking about community?
For me, it was, I remember it pretty vividly, it was in 1998 when my brother came back from the US and he introduced me to Linux. And I used to work at a bookstore and I used my 50% discount to go and buy this book which had a version of Linux attached to the side of it.
Oh, wow.
And I was reading the first chapter and it was talking about that this platform was put together by thousands of people around the world on the internet. And the internet, of course, back then was exciting and new and different.
Very new.
So the idea of people collaborating electronically was exciting to a 18-year-old teenager who wanted to somehow plug into the world in some way. So it was actually that first chapter of that book that I found more interesting than the technology itself, because the technology was pretty brutal back then.
Yeah.
With
Slackware.
Yeah, that's exactly what it was.
Yeah.
It was Slackware 96. So for me, it just opened up this notion of, well, how do you encourage people to work together on a core mission? And there's so many nuances in how that works. And it just started a lifelong interest for me and trying to figure out what that looks like.
I think I had that book because that's exactly when I first tried to install Linux was from the discs in the back of that book.
Seriously, you need,
you
need a soldering iron and
it was
a lot of luck.
I want to use a stronger word than problem. Challenging is the right word.
Challenging.
Yeah.
Yes.
And yet, it's amazing because Linux wouldn't exist if it weren't for the internet. Open source in general probably wouldn't make a lot of sense without some means of people collaborating globally.
Yeah, exactly. It's interesting. In the work that I've done, I've spent the majority of my career working in open source, and one of the things I was excited about going to XPrize was to really kind of explore a new area of community and kind of get out my comfort zone. And one of the things that's kind of shaken out of that is I've developed my own philosophy of the opportunity of what a community is, which is, when we get people together and we've got a shared mission, a shared ethos, and that can be Wikipedia, it can be an open source project, it can be activism.
It can be Twit.
It could be Twit, it could be 3D printing, whatever it might be.
Yeah.
When people have got access to the tools and the knowledge they need to succeed, it's incredible what's possible. And it has an impact far greater than any individual. What's interesting is that I think in the last 5 or 6 years, we're seeing a renaissance happening in community where it's going from observational, essentially copying people and how they do it, to people writing it down and figuring out repeatable best practice. So, when I started out, I just frankly copied a lot of the early people in Linux. I copied Linus Torvalds and KDE and those projects. And now we're really starting to get into the testable nature of community and figure out how to repeat this and package it.
This is what I want to know.
So, and I think the opportunity there at that point is when you can figure out that magic recipe and you can package it and you can transmit it across the world, it makes us as a human, as humans, more effective at collaborating. So. Yeah,
because up to now, really, or up till recently, the rules were all empirical, trial and error. Did this work? Does this not work?
Exactly.
And error, frankly, often the problem with community, you can screw a community up beyond repair, I think.
Yeah, yeah.
And so I think of the early communities that I joined, like The Well, Usenet.
Right.
Were both really great communities when you first discovered them. It's like, this is amazing.
Right.
And then Flame Wars and crankiness and frankly, deliberate vandalism ended up swallowing these communities. And so it became clear to me, and we've done several forums. We've tried doing AppNet, the Twitter clone.
Right.
We've tried different ways of community. Although it's always been clear to me that Twit is about community. That in fact, all podcasting really is about community. If you want to be a successful podcaster, success is not measured in dollars; it's measured in whether you're able to build a community around what you're doing.
Exactly. Yeah.
And I think that's going to be increasingly true in general. I think if you look at YouTube, broadcasting is changing. Broadcasting used to be audience, now it's community.
Yeah.
So I think music, everything. The secret to community is the secret to making your way in the world.
Yeah.
Increasingly.
I'd agree, and I think the challenge is balance, particularly when there's commercial elements involved. So we saw this
a lot
Reddit. So Reddit is a good example. We've seen this in the open source world.
Yeah.
It's balancing out expectation, information, and then authenticity. Is that invariably with most communities, they want it to be authentic. They want it to feel like the investment of time and energy from that corporate stakeholder is invested in a shared set of interests for that community. So
it's an issue. You look at Twitter, and at least for me, it became very clear that Twitter was a commercial enterprise in effect, using me and using the community he had built Facebook is kind of that way too. But you make that trade because the value of the community is enough that you can overlook the fact that Facebook's mining that community as if it were a gold mine, looking for money. So it is possible.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
But it's a challenge.
I think a lot of it boils down to, frankly, his expectations. Is that when you
before you go in,
this is one of the things that we struggled with in Ubuntu. Was we went from, back in 2006, we were a typical Linux distribution. We pulled in lots of other pieces of software and packaged it into a single system. And as Ubuntu changed and got into the mobile phone world and into the tablet world and things like that, the projects shifted to being focused a little bit more on app developers and a little less on the platform itself.
Yeah.
And it's difficult to make that change without crisply articulating it to a community and setting those expectations as different. Because invariably you don't realize what you're doing when you're doing it. So that's one of the when I've done consultancy or when I've worked in companies, I've always said like the most important thing that we have to do is set expectations crisply, because even if that means having a really uncomfortable conversation, it'll be uncomfortable at first, but it's better to get that clarity out there. Because the worst thing is when you have people who've been working on a project for a couple of years in a community, and then they feel like they were sideswiped a little bit.
That's what happened at Reddit. You have a rebellion because it's not clear. Community members think, oh, no, we own this. And then along comes Reddit to say, well, actually, you don't.
Right.
We own this. Yep. We're talking to Jono Bacon. He's written the guidebook to this mystery land of community. And his book, The Art of Community, is at theartofcommunityonline.org. Second edition is out now.
Yep.
I'll talk about what's new in the second edition, how it's changed from your first efforts at this. And the foreword from the second edition has somebody a little bit better than the foreword from the first edition. But okay,
I think they're pretty equal. In terms of...
At least you continue to include the original. Thank you.
Oh, of course.
And you talk in the book. You're talking to people who are experts in building community and who have succeeded in making community work. So we're going to talk more with Jono in just a second. If you're in the chat room, our community, your questions are more than welcome. Although I'm not going to ask him how he's connected to Kevin Bacon. That community question is out.
We have a special relationship. We'll leave it at that.
Our show today is brought to you by a new sponsor I'm really glad to welcome called Next Issue. Actually, I've been a subscriber to Next Issue since they came out, which is a couple of years ago. They don't say this, but I'm going to say it. It's kind of like Netflix for magazines. You pay one flat rate, and you can get all your magazines on your iPad or your iPhone or your Android device, and it's really nice because the problem with magazines, it's not the paper that's old-fashioned. It's the idea that it's like going to one website and reading it from front to back. People don't do that anymore. We want to dip in and dip out. So this really makes a lot of sense. You don't want to read every article in Wired magazine, usually, or in Style or Bicycling or Bloomberg Business Week. But there are definitely articles each week, each month that you do want to read. And having a subscription, in effect, to all of them is absolutely the way to go. And by the way, your tablet is a great way to read magazines. You have all of them with you all of the time. Iconic magazines like Fast Company, Esquire, Rolling Stone. I pretend when I go to my next issue that I'm reading Fortune and Fast Company and Forbes. I'm reading Popular Science. I'm reading Wired magazine. Truthfully, I'm reading People and Us and Entertainment Weekly because I like a little bit of gossip. You don't want to be caught buying those magazines, but the Vanity Fair. Wait a minute, go back there. Is that Amy Schumer in a Princess Leia costume on GQ's cover? Yes, it is. Now, wouldn't you like to read that? Well, if you were a Next Issue subscriber, you wouldn't even have to buy it. You just go. Next Issue. I want you to check it out. Nextissue.com/triangulation. We've got a month free for you. A month free. Download the mobile app. Start building your library. Explore the many magazines at your fingertips. There is great writing being done, great journalism being done, fascinating subjects, great pictures. They're all out there, you can't go to a newsstand anymore. Those things are gone, but you can have a newsstand on your iPad, on your tablet right now with Next Issue. I love Next Issue. The best content Always available. And by the way, it is available offline. You download ahead of time, get on the plane. And I've seen people get on the plane with stacks of magazines. Alex Lindsay does that with stacks of magazines. Not anymore. He's got Next Issue. And by the way, it's just the same format as the magazines. You'll feel very comfortable. Rolling Stone. I don't really want to subscribe to Rolling Stone, but there's always an article I have to read. You will love it. Immediate access to all the top magazines, including, by the way, back issues. And there's exclusive content that you can't get in the print, like videos and photos. Nextissue.com/triangulation. Try it for 30 days free, but I warn you, it's kind of addictive. Nextissue.com/triangulation. Jono Bacon is our guest, longtime friend, former host of Floss Weekly, our open source program, and the author of The Art of Community at The Art of Community, or actually just Art of Community online. .org. I think we should probably start at first principles. What is a community?
I think it's pretty simple. It's just a group of people who spend time doing something. Invariably.
Okay. Share an interest.
Yeah, I tend to break it into two types. I call them read and write communities. So read communities are kind of fans who get together to consume an interest or to spend time with each other.
And that's the majority, probably.
Yeah, Taylor Swift fans, Game of Thrones, all that kind of stuff.
Yeah.
But then write communities are the communities invariably get together to actually improve the thing that brought them together. And we see that in open source, with Wikipedia, with maker communities and things like that.
Although I would bet a lot of people in the Ubuntu community weren't committers to the Ubuntu project.
Yeah, yeah. And I think there is often a transitionary phase. Like a lot of people joined Ubuntu, or not just Ubuntu, they join as a user, and then they love it, and then they hear about, oh wow, I can play a role in making this better. And then they start with filing a bug, and then they maybe translate something, and then before you know it, they've grown a beard and they're writing code. So
you do have to grow the beard. I'm sorry.
Well, certainly back in the early days, beards were almost necessary.
Man or woman, you still have to grow. No, we're just
virtual.
A virtual beard.
All right. Yeah.
I think this is community is one of the great inventions of the internet era. In fact, I'm gonna go a little bit farther. Mankind discovered well, of course, it starts with tribes, doesn't it?
Right.
But tribes were were about geography and bloodline more than anything else. You know, you were stuck with whoever was in your tribe or family or whatever, or community group, because that's who you were born into. But and then in the I think it was probably the 17th century, humans discovered the company.
Right.
Amazing, powerful discovery. Steve Jobs talks about this, how he realized the company was the most amazing invention of humankind because it allowed all the other inventions. It's quickly become the case that a single person can't, I mean, Linus can write the kernel,
right,
but you can't continue to grow all by yourself.
Yeah.
So the company was a great revelation, and that was almost always a commercial entity.
Yeah.
In our century, or last 50 years, and most particularly since the 90s and the internet, community.
Yeah.
And I think it's as powerful, if not more powerful, than company.
Yeah, I'd agree. I mean, I think we're seeing this interesting change in how we work together as people. And we're starting to see this more and more in companies. So if you look at the typical company from 20 or 30 years ago.
It's very hierarchical.
Very hierarchical, very locked in, and very much of a sense of there were outside elements to merit that played a role in whether you made it in that company.
And you're working for the man.
Right, exactly.
You're not working for yourself.
Exactly. Whereas increasingly, and I think Google really spearheaded a lot of this with the way they operated in the early days, was they made the company more about the people.
Yeah.
Than it was certainly about the product, but it was about providing an environment in which people where innovation and interest and success can come from anywhere.
Right. And they fostered passion with the 20% project and stuff.
Yeah.
You were there for yourself as much as you were for Larry and Sergey.
Exactly, and I think what that does is I think most of us want to be able to pursue our interests and our passions in a way where we can earn a living and we can feel like we're doing both. Where the perfect job is where you can earn your family's, you can take care of your family, but then you can also pursue the world in a way that's interesting to you. And the way Google, I think, architected that and given people that sense provides an incredible level of commitment in their staff. So
as I mentioned, in the early communities like Usenet, BBSs, which I ran.
Really?
Yeah, I had a BBS in 1985 called MacQ. But that's not a synchronous community. It's an asynchronous community because only one or two people. I had 2 lines, so only 2 people could be there. So it's not like they're talking to each other as in the chat room. They're leaving a message and somebody else is leaving a message. It was FidoNet. Tom Jennings was an early community builder with FidoNet. This was a federation of BBSs instead of just onesie, twosie BBSs, and eventually created EchoNet, which was kind of a poor man's Usenet. And So I'm very familiar with these early days of communities, and we didn't know any rules. We didn't know about moderation, for instance. And I don't mean moderation in the sense of being moderate. I mean moderation in the sense of overseeing a community. What did we learn? Because the early days, things worked well for a while, but the wheels tended to fall off.
Yeah, and I think in those early communities, a lot of the, you know, I think one of the most challenging things of communities is how you measure it, how you count it, because there's different elements of how you assess what success looks like.
Yes, that's true.
And one of the key things is health. Like, how healthy is it? How much do people want to be around there? And back in those early, I remember when I first got in Usenet, and it was a generally healthy community because people were participating in a way that were within the parameters of the expectations of that community. Like if you were...
Expectations, that word comes up again.
Yeah, exactly. And so, you know, there'd sometimes be trolls, and those people would usually be ignored for all intents and purposes. But those people were, to me, a community like that was less of a community. It was just more of a shared place to put things up on the wall.
Right.
It was kind of like a blank wall, and everyone was sticking Post-it notes up there.
Yeah.
The challenge is when you've got dependencies on other people. So when I used Usenet, there was rarely a dependency on other people for what I was doing. You started seeing that in some of the collaborative, like comp.os.linux and things like that.
People would ask questions, they would help one another.
Right. But it was very much like a one-on-one, you throw something out and maybe you'll get a response. The challenge is when you've got people, for example, collaborating around a thing. So whether it's a code base or whether it's a project or some other thing. And what happens there is you have entitlement to wrap your head around. Like sometimes you'll get people who don't actually do very much, who know their way around a blog. Who can build a sense of entitlement in the community towards them, but they don't actually contribute. So we've got these challenges that face, like how do you measure the success of people and then map that to their level of influence on the project? And we're still figuring a lot of that stuff out as we go forward. Because I think it's important to remember we're still very much in the early days.
Oh, yeah.
You know, I mean, I would argue that open source is where is where the community innovation is happening. I think that's where a significant chunk of it in terms of collaborative community. And we've only really been doing this now, I'd say fully, for about 10, 15 years. So
it reminds me of the old saying, I love people, it's just the individuals I don't like. The problem, we all love community. The problem is it's made of people.
Yeah.
And there's all kinds of people, all of whom have merit. It's not like even a troll doesn't have merit.
Yeah.
But really the troll is the easy one. That's the obvious one.
Yeah.
There's other types that can be destructive to a community and with the best intentions.
Well, yeah, and I think the first thing I've been getting interested in a science called behavioral economics recently.
Isn't that great? I love it.
Fascinating.
We've had Dan Ariely on.
Oh, you have? Yeah.
Author of Predictably Irrational.
Predictably Irrational.
One of the early guys doing this, and it's fascinating.
It's absolutely fascinating. And the thing that I love about it is that it identifies that people are irrational by definition.
But they think they're rational.
Right. Exactly.
And as it turns out, they're completely irrational.
And but there is a science to
they're predictable.
The predictability of irrational people.
Yeah.
And his book is excellent. And I think we can see a lot of that in communities, is that you see these consistent personality types that occur in different communities. So using trolls as an example, I've always been of the view that with most trolls, there is a semblance of intelligence and there is a semblance of reasoning there, but it's buried under insecurity and it's buried under people who feel like they don't have a loudspeaker.
Right.
And I think when you can engage with those people at the right kind of level, you can actually convert them.
Yeah.
I've done this over the years in the communities that I've been a part of. I remember we had this one guy who was a pretty bad troll in the Ubuntu world.
What would he do?
Sorry?
What would he do? How was he a troll?
He basically, whenever we'd post anything, any news, any response, he would be there with a 15-paragraph kind of monologue about every minor detail.
How crappy it was, yeah.
And So I remember.
But he probably thought he was contributing.
He thought he was helping, and you could tell in the way that he wasn't a troll. That he wasn't abusive.
He wasn't a vandal.
No, he was respectful, but he was picky and he was finicky
and
about.
it caused a problem.
And he saw conspiracy in places where conspiracy didn't happen.
Right.
But one of the conclusions I came to from that was that when you're in a position like a community manager or you work for a company, you always have more information. So you have to accept the fact that other people are not going to have that level of information. And most human beings, when they don't have the information, they fill in the gaps themselves.
This happens a lot in our chat room.
Right.
I'm always amazed at the projections people will make about what's going on behind the scenes here.
Right.
It's like, really? You think that's what happened?
From my experience.
But that
today,
makes sense.
Yeah.
We know more because we're here.
Right, exactly. And we can see what's going on.
Yeah.
And we know the people behind it. So it's funny because in that particular case,
So what do you do? Yeah.
So in that particular, I took a slightly unusual approach, and on April the 1st, I wrote a blog post where I pretended to be this guy, and I basically said,
So you held up a mirror.
This guy doesn't exist,
right.
And I've been faking him for the entire time. And what was interesting, it was kind of a joke, but obviously, but he took it really well, and I think he saw the humanity and the humor in what was going on, and we actually ended up meeting in a coffee shop about a year later. And we're good friends. And it's one of those things whereby he's a good guy, but the way he was articulating his participation in the conversation was not compatible with the way I was articulating and some other people that I work with.
At some point, do you pull him aside and say, hey, mate, let me just tell you something?
Well, and that's, the other thing that I think is interesting is people who behave, and this is not this guy that I'm referring to, but people who behave inappropriately or antisocially, I think a lot of those people don't realize they're doing it.
Yeah, I think
and
so.
just getting them on the phone, and it has to be a phone. You can't do this over email. And just saying, look, as a friend, I just want to say you're kind of coming across this way. And you might want to dial it back a little bit. And it's amazing.
Does that work?
It's work. I mean, most cases it's worked for me where there's a lot of delicacy in how you handle that situation because you don't want people to feel humiliated and all the rest of it.
Right.
But I honestly believe that you can hack human beings in a way that results in great outcomes in the vast majority of human beings. There are some people, though, who are just inherently bad people and they're out for bad things.
What do you do? What do you do then?
That's
the vandal, really.
That is the vandal. I think vandal is a good way to describe it. I think the only way you can deal with those people, frankly, is I think everyone should be given a shot at change. And then if you don't get the change, that's when you wield the ban hammer. And
I think our mods have heard that phrase once or twice. In fact, I think there's a brick outside that says the ban hammer with a big hammer in it.
Yeah, and but I think that the challenge that we have in communities is that people wield that power all too often.
Yes.
And they don't give people.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
You can be abusive as a community moderator.
Right.
As abusive as a troll or a vandal.
Yeah.
But it's actually one of the most challenging things in the world to do. You almost have to be a psychotherapist.
Right. Well, and that's, I think, one of the difficulties is that with communities, there's a lot of very nuanced elements that are involved.
Nuanced is a good word.
There's
subtle.
It relies on a lot of experience in terms of the environment that you're working in, and also kind of understanding the differences that are going on in the different people you're working with. Because I think we sometimes forget that it's like when you're out in the street and you're driving around in your car and someone cuts you up or someone's rude to you in a store or whatever it might. It's easy for us to forget what somebody else's bad day might be, And the way I look at it is when somebody's acting in a negative way in a community, you just don't know what's going on in their life. They may be having difficulties at home. They may have been diagnosed with a horrible disease. You just don't know what's happening. And I think it's good to give those people the benefit of the doubt in a structured way to say to them, look, we have to find a conclusion to this, but let's have a conversation first instead of kicking them out.
Yeah, I like it. You do a yearly community leadership summit. You just had your summit this year in Oregon, Portland.
Yeah.
That brings together community managers and organizers and people who are doing this. Is it all in nonprofit and open source space, or is it also commercial space?
So we do, the Community Leadership Summit this year was the 7th year, I think it was.
Wow.
And it's the weekend before a large conference called the OSCON, the O'Reilly Open Source.
So you're going to get a
Conference.
lot of open source people.
By definition, get a lot of open source people. But we do get people from government and from nonprofits and from various other places.
Everybody's trying to understand this.
Yeah. Because
it's the key to, I'll reiterate, I think to success in many businesses, including, you mentioned Game of Thrones. If you're creating a television program, you have to shift from thinking of it as a passive viewing audience.
Yeah.
It isn't anymore. And real success is being a Breaking Bad or a True Detective, where you get people writing about it, talking about it, obsessively thinking about it. And I think there's the thought currently going around that increasingly people like the creator of True Detective are aware of this and actually are putting stuff in the show to facilitate this kind of obsessive community.
Yeah, I agree.
Making it.
Yeah, Joss Whedon was one of the trailblazers of that work.
Absolutely, brilliant.
Yeah, and it was definitely. I mean, I think what's interesting is that it's still, I'd say to most people, the notion of that balance of how to operate a community and how to build a community is pretty unusual.
It's
and
a dark
unknown.
art.
In fact, I was having a conversation with there's a guy called Jim Whitehurst, who is CEO of Red Hat, and he has an interesting background because he was a management consultant. Then he worked at Delta Airlines, and then he went from Delta to be CEO at Red Hat. So he went from the non-open source world to the open source world that's obviously inherently all about community.
Yeah.
And he said that if it wasn't from the fact that he didn't have that background, he wouldn't have seen a lot of the subtleties in how communities work.
Yeah.
And I had a very similar experience when I went from Canonical to XPrize, is that those things that you presume that you, even though you say to yourself, these are assumptions and I need to not treat them as assumptions, you're sucked into that anyway. And so I think there's a tremendous opportunity to really understand the basic social principles of why we do this and why I want this. Because my philosophy has always been, we all want to feel a sense of belonging.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter where you are, whether you're in your family, in your company, in your local community.
It's the return of the tribal.
Right, it is. And it's such a basic human principle that we're now seeing empowered via the internet and various other things. And so, and particularly with the birth of 3D printing and drones and big data and crowdfunding, there's such a great opportunity to catalyze all this together.
It's exciting.
It's awesome.
It's really exciting. So you're glad you've stumbled into this bit of...
Put it this way, I'm glad that when I was 17 or 18, I decided to pursue this instead of being in a heavy metal band.
We know Jono is a great musician because every time you were on, how many guitars do you have? There was a rack of them behind you.
Yeah, I know.
Do you still play? Do you still perform?
I play less these days.
Bands have a lot to learn from this, don't they?
Yeah.
If you're going to succeed nowadays, you cannot look to the music industry, which really brings up images of smokestack factories, and it kind of is, cranking out the hits. You have to build a community around you and your artistry. I would say any artist needs to do this now.
Yeah, it's interesting you should say that, because when I first moved to the US, around the time we were doing Floss Weekly, I put together a band called Severed Fifth, and the basic idea here was, this is a fairly growly metal band, and what we're going to do is we're going to give all of our music away for free. All of it.
Wow.
So Radiohead had done this a little bit, Nine Inch Nails had done this, but they already had pre-existing reputations.
Right.
We did not.
It's a scary thing.
And so what was interesting was I met one of my idols in an airport, and he used to play drums in a band called Machine Head, and he connected me to a bunch of musicians, and we started playing shows. And because we were connected in through him, we got to play some really great shows in the Bay Area, which is a great place for metal. But the notion of this, we give our music away for free, freaked out a lot of the local bands, because they said that's how we earn our money. And you're kind of coming in here and doing this whole different thing. And it was, again, like going between different worlds.
Yeah.
Like in the technology world, the Creative Commons is very well respected, and we get that. But in the music world, it's very different, at least from my experience.
No,
there.
photographers too.
Yeah.
I've had this conversation many times with great photographers, and they say you can't give away you can't put your photos on the internet. They'll rob you blind. and it's hard to make that leap. You look at somebody like Cory Doctorow, who, because of his background, I think, in open source, understands that, you cast your bread upon the waters and it will come back to you manyfold. Giving stuff away is actually a strategy that works. Paul Coelho did that with The Alchemist, and he's become a huge success. But it's so counterintuitive.
Yeah. And I think a lot of it is because people feel like they don't have those tools to understand that piece. Like, they know that they've got YouTube and they've got Twitter and they've got all these pieces, but they don't know how to connect these together so they can get their work out.
There are some bands doing it successfully. I think of unsigned bands like Humphreys McGee, who have become as successful as any signed band, without a label.
Yeah.
Because they honor and they cherish their fans. Now, it helps if you're a jam band. There's something about jam bands that I don't know about metal, but something about jam bands that attracts a certain type of person.
Right.
You think of people who followed the Grateful Dead around in buses.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
But Humphreys is a jam band, but they do all sorts of things for their community all the time. They do online concerts.
Yeah.
And they sell. As you leave the show, they have a USB key you can buy with the music from the show on it. They have headphone pits where people can hear it from the mixing board in the show. They're very aware.
Yeah.
And they even have requests systems that you can request during a show what you want them
Well, the
to
thing
play.
I love about that is they're innovating in a space that hasn't traditionally innovated very much.
Yes.
And it's interesting because that whole world is about, when you sign to a record label, you're signing to a marketing company and a distribution company, essentially. And now we can skip a lot of that. I mean, you just have to see some of the YouTubers that are having success.
It's really interesting.
It's phenomenal. So
yeah, times are changing. What is your advice for, for instance, I'll use myself as an example. It's really clear that the success of our network over the last 10 years is because we have a community. We brought a community in from Tech TV, which I think the folks who ran Tech TV had no idea. This was a traditional television network. They had no idea that they were building a community, right?
Right.
We had live chat. We were doing some stuff. Those people, thank you, followed me over to Twit and allowed us to build something pretty amazing in a completely new arena. But at the same time, and I'll confess this, there's this tension between me and the community sometimes.
Right.
Sometimes they get on my nerves. And maybe that's because I'm an old-fashioned, old-fart broadcaster who just wants you to sit down, shut up, let me talk, right?
Right.
It's hard, especially as the community grows.
Yeah.
It's hard to deal with.
Well, yeah, and I think there's a couple of things rolled up in this. The first thing is that tension will always exist. It will never go away. There'll always be an element of the community will always feel a little bit maligned in a way. And the broadcaster will always feel that the community's expectations are sometimes unrealistic and don't take into account the internal stresses and strains that you'll have to deal with.
Yes. It's hard.
It's tough.
I taught Regis Philbin, of all people, he was the host of Live with Regis and Kelly, about Twitter. And we sat down, and it was the day he announced his retirement, and he tweeted it. And then I said, okay, now we look at the replies. He had never had the experience of doing something and then having people talk back. And his eyes got wide, and he got on the phone to his wife. He said, Joy, go to Twitter. Look at Twitter. They're talking to me. And he got thousands of responses. And at first, it was very enlivening for him.
Yeah.
Because it was like doing a live show almost. There were people, and he was fascinated by the conversation. But about 3 weeks later, after I had left, he said, I quit Twitter. Because he can't control what's coming back at him.
Yeah, exactly.
And it's a huge variety of stuff. And he didn't have the wherewithal to deal with it.
Well, and that's the thing. And I think part of it that he'll experience, and obviously you're going to experience as well, is there is something about when you've got an individual celebrity, when you've got a level of celebrity involved in any community. We had the same thing in Canonical with Mark Shuttleworth and at XPrize with Peter Diamandis. That there will always be levels of expectation that are just frankly going to be unrealistic with that particular individual, because everyone's going to want a little bit of time with them, particularly when they have a bit of time with that person in the earlier days. And I think it's difficult. I think what you guys are doing here is great because you're very open. You incorporate the community into what you're doing. You could very easily just ignore the chat channel, and you could switch it off and not do the live.
I've done that.
and I think that at that point people will, if they don't feel like they're playing a role in it, then they will kind of go on and they'll do something else.
Well, I learned a lesson. We had a bad troll problem for a while. And at one point, I just was so frustrated by it, I said, we're going to shut down the chat room. And I very quickly learned that that's not mine to shut down. This was before the Reddit event, and I thought that gave me some insight into what happened with Reddit, because it very quickly became apparent to me that the mods never considered this my chat room. It was their chat room. Yeah. And they had created it. They had written software for it. I mean, we own and run the servers, and it is official in the sense that it is part of what we do, and we refer to it, and we send people there. But it's not mine. No, it's a community.
It's a commons.
It's a commons.
Yeah.
And so within 5 days, I said, whoops, I'm sorry. I was wrong. It's not mine to shut down.
And that's where I think Reddit are it's been interesting watching the recent Reddit thinkers. I mean, I'm a big fan of Reddit. I use it. I
Me too.
read Reddit every single day, and it's difficult because what they effectively did was they architected a system that is open to abuse, and they've architected it in a way that brings the good stuff to the surface, which I think they've done a very elegant job
because
of doing.
of the upvoting.
Because of the upvote, and also just the choice of like the default subreddits and their policy. I fail to remember exactly what it was, but it was something like, you know, we don't mind what happens inside of a subreddit, but if that bleeds out into other subreddits,
we don't want to see it.
Then it becomes a problem. But they're straddling this really difficult line between what is considered free speech and what isn't. And there is basically no good outcome that can come out of this.
That's kind of, it seems...
They're going to have to either, at least from my perspective, they're going to have to either just accept the fact that they're a site that does not welcome certain types of content.
Right.
So on all the racist subreddits, just ban them and get rid of them and say, look, we appreciate that we're not fully about free speech, but that's just the way it is.
Right.
Or you can accept that you are fully about free speech, and then you let that stuff fester, and that will bring down parts of Reddit. So,
old friend Chuck von Rosbach wrote a very widely disseminated blog post about that, saying, if you have a bar and you let in bikers, now you have a biker bar. Done. Right?
Right.
Well, I want to take a break, and we'll talk more about Reddit, and I'd love to get some advice for myself, but for all of our audience members about building a community, how to set expectations appropriately at the beginning, what you do, and things like that. We're talking with the king of community. I'm gonna dub you that. The king of community. He is Jono Bacon. He was originally a Ubuntu community manager for many years. Now at XPrize, where he manages the community there, and has written the book. And I think really this is the book, The Art of Community. Now in its second edition from O'Reilly Press. You can get it on Amazon and everywhere else. So go to artofcommunityonline.org and you can participate. Do you have a community here?
You know, I've deliberately not tried to create a community around the book specifically because I just don't have time.
So it's okay not to have a community?
Yeah, oh, totally. I think you should only have a community if you can put the time and the effort into it.
Yeah, that's.
But I've been building a community of community managers called communityleadershipforum.com.
Like that.
And the goal of that is I don't want to make a community just about me. Like, the book would be very self-indulgent, I think.
Yeah.
So the idea is that this community of community managers is for people who read other books and don't like what I have to say, of which there are many.
We'll have more with Jono.
God bless them all.
I like what you have to say. I'm in your community. More with Jono coming up in just a second. One of the things I love about everything we do here is what we are really is observers about how technology is changing dramatically, radically changing our world, and I love that. And many of our sponsors are an example of that. We talked about Next Issue. Here's another one, Prosper.com. This is changing the way you can borrow money. Traditionally, if you wanted to borrow money, you had kind of a limited number of choices. You'd go to your brother-in-law, but he's going to lord it over you for the rest of your life. You could go to the loan shark down the street, and that isn't going to be cheap. Most people go to a bank, right? Hat in hand. A lot of people borrow on their credit cards, and talk about loan shark. That's going to cost you a lot of money. I've got a better way, and it's thanks to the internet. It's Prosper.com. It's a peer-to-peer lending marketplace. So Prosper brings together people with money to lend with people who need to borrow money. That's exactly how it works. They facilitate the transaction. It's friction-free. In fact, if you go to prosper.com/twit, you can literally fill in this form here and find out instantly how much money you could get and what your rate would be. Always a fixed rate, always low. Always a lot lower than your credit cards, I can promise you that. You can get as much as $35,000 in as little as 5 days, so it's fast. And there's all sorts of things you could do with it. I mean, if you need something to do with it, pay off that higher interest rate credit card. That's a loan that you're paying double-digit interest rate on. Nah, Prosper's awesome. And you don't even, you don't have to get all dressed up and go to the bank hat in hand. Right now, for a limited time, Prosper's offering Twit viewers a $50 Visa gift card with your low-interest loan. So let me reiterate, as much as $35,000 in as few as 5 days, a low-rate, fixed-rate loan, and a $50 Visa gift card when you get that loan. That sounds pretty good, doesn't it? Prosper.com/twit. Twit. They're waiting for you. What a great idea. Peer-to-peer lending, just one of so many ways technology is changing our lives today. Jono Bacon is our guest on Triangulation, the author of The Art of Community, artofcommunityonline.org if you want to know more. If you want to get the book, get it there. He's also the community manager now at XPrize, the XPrize Foundation, which has got to be fun.
It's a good time.
So when you're building a community from scratch, where do you start? Do you make rules right away? You said setting expectations.
Yeah, so I like to think of it in a couple of ways. The first thing is define a vision about communities need a vision. They need something that they're reaching for. I think Mozilla are a good example of this. They did a great job when they said, we're going to build an open web. Or Jimmy Wales with Wikipedia said,
Wikipedia is an amazing example of community.
Phenomenal. I mean, the Smithsonian valued it at tens of billions of dollars.
Yeah.
There's just tremendous value there. So the first thing is have a vision, but a vision is not enough. I think that you have to have some form of hackable content. So with Wikipedia, it was writing knowledge, essentially.
And that has a low bar for entry, unlike, say, an open source project.
Right.
Almost anybody can edit or write about something on Wikipedia.
Yeah,
is that important?
I think it's really important because it's the hackable content is going to be the thing that people can get, they can contort, they can twist, they can improve, and they can
be a member of the community in a contributing way.
Exactly, and so this is very much about contributor communities, and that hackable content could be a discussion forum, it could be a chat room, it could be some way in which you can play a role in something tangible. That the vision is the thing that gets people interested. The hackable content is the thing that gets people working.
Yeah.
But then, to me, it's like a restaurant. Like, if you go to a restaurant, everything from how you show up if you're going to valet your car, how you get a table, the order in which they get your water and your drinks and then your food and whatever else. The whole thing is like a flowchart of an experience. And then that flowchart has experiential bits plugged into it, like what does the restaurant look like? How are the staff trained and all the rest of it. The same thing can be said for any kind of human experience, and the community is the same. So what I like to do is say, okay, what's the vision? What's the hackable stuff that we're going to work on? And then let's draw a flowchart of how people hear about it, how they get involved, how they get access to the tools, how they learn how to use those tools, how they find something to do, and how we celebrate their accomplishments.
Wow, this is great.
So it's like I like to kind of put it that way. And this is, this can take 2 or 3 years to really flesh that out.
Yeah.
But I think once you have that kind of structure at that point, the goal that we want, I think, is when someone hears about your community, when they're stood in an elevator and someone says, you should come and join Twit or whatever it might be, that they can do something that's fulfilling to them that benefits that community within a day.
Love that. Within a day, right away.
Yeah. Just get in, learn about it, and get up and running. And like I say, open source has been great at kind of pursuing one method of doing this within software primarily, but we're seeing this all over the world in other communities doing similar kind of things.
You would always say when you came on Floss Weekly that there are many different jobs that people need to be done at Ubuntu. It isn't all coding. There's a lot, and so it's important to have a variety of skill levels. And
diversity is really important.
Yeah.
I mean, not only in terms of people. I mean, obviously an environment that celebrates men, women, people of different colors, and all the rest of it, which is commonly referred to as surface diversity, but deeper level diversity in terms of ideas and problem solving, and then just methods of participating, documentation, translations, advocacy.
It's interesting. This is so applicable to so many things. Loquacious in our chat room said, it's like a homeowners association. It's the same thing if you live in a condo, right? The homeowners association has all of the pros and cons of any online community. It's the same thing. There's all those personalities show up.
Exactly.
But I think the rules apply too.
Yeah, I mean, it's like I say, it's just communities are just groups of people. And
people are people.
My view has always been when you take away the screens and the cameras and the mobile phones and the cars and everything else, we're just animals and we just want to feel that sense of dignity.
We're just smart monkeys, let's just face it.
We're smart monkeys. And,
maybe not even that smart.
And that's why I love the whole behavioral economics thing.
Right.
That if we can take the lessons learned in how we define what happiness is, and we can build structure around that in our flowchart, then you get really fulfilling experiences for people. Yeah. And traditionally, we've just kind of stumbled on that in communities, and now we're figuring out how to do it.
Reddit sprung up as kind of similar to Dig. I mean, they were competitors.
Yeah.
And Dig fell first.
Yep.
for basically turning its back on community, pissing off the community. But Dig had a problem, not exactly the same problem as Reddit had. Dig had a problem that people were gaming Dig.
Yeah.
And so the important thing for Dig was that the front page have stories you wanted to read, but instead it was a lot of spam, basically.
Yeah.
Because people were gaming it. They tried to fix it. They did Dig 3.0. They did everything they could, and in the long run, nothing worked, and they essentially went out of business. They've been acquired, and they've changed.
Yeah.
Reddit, a little different. Reddit was a response to Dig that said, no. First of all, they very much said we're a free speech entity from day one. They did have upvoting, and so the same idea was the good stuff would surface, would come to the front page. They did a lot of things right, and for many years, there wasn't really any problem.
Yeah, it's interesting because, I mean, at least they used to. I think they still are owned by Condé Nast.
Yeah, it's complicated.
It's kind of an unusual relationship there, but they basically left them to their own devices. Very small, thin operation. The thing I've always loved about Reddit is, you know, like you see a lot of web properties and they start in a fairly pure way, and then before long they turn into like the front page of Yahoo, and it's just covered in ads and distractions. And Reddit have resisted that to a large extent. The thing I loved about Reddit and still love about Reddit is it's about content and about the great content floating up to the top, whether it's comments or whether it's actual content that's being linked to. It's just, like I said earlier on, I think they've just built a platform that is inherently flawed in the way it can be abused.
So there's no hope.
Well, and the thing that they have to do is, I think that they need to make a decision about, again, with expectations. I think if Reddit basically got up today and said, we are not going to tolerate racism and homophobia and all that kind of stuff on Reddit, at the subreddit level particularly, there would be an absolute uproar and a lot of people would go off to vote. But that would be an investment in setting expectations.
Right.
But if they do...
It's almost a reboot at this point.
Yeah, but if they do say we're going to allow, you know, Coontown and all these other kind of
I think they've decided to ban them.
Right. I mean,
they have decided to kill them.
They've certainly banned some of them.
The problem is, it's hard to... So one person's... I do not envy
they're in
Steve
an impossible position.
and Alexis are in.
Yeah, because I mean, it's determining what they define as
it's somebody is
what's wrong.
Yeah, somebody's going to be the arbiter.
And some people are of the view that Reddit inherently suppresses free speech because you can downvote people who have good perspectives to oblivion. But to me, that's an academic perspective. Like you have that with
Slashdot has survived.
Yeah,
still works. Same idea.
Yeah.
Maybe because they never got popular. I always feel like one of the problems in a community is becoming too popular.
Yeah. That's definitely an issue. Well, part of the challenge is that, and we had this in Ubuntu, was, you know, in Ubuntu we went through this interesting change where we started building at Canonical large pieces of software that were traditionally built in the general open source community, and that infuriated many members of the Ubuntu community.
It's like Microsoft putting in a browser in its operating system.
Yeah, and it was, but what was interesting in dealing with that was, first of all, this hadn't been done very much previously in open source. It was a new thing. But also there's very few communities that are that big, that have thousands and thousands and thousands of participants all over the world. So it's a pretty lonely kind of environment where there's not, you know, I'd call people in various other large open source communities like Wikipedia and Mozilla and say, how are you guys handling this? Because there's probably 4 or 5 really big communities like that.
How does Wikipedia manage to stay so good?
You know, their content is excellent. What I don't know, I don't have a lot of...
We don't know what's behind the scenes.
I don't know a lot of what's behind... There's been a lot of frustration at Wikipedia in terms of edit wars and things like that. I don't have a lot of knowledge there. But I think that those are just localized politics. It's certainly not bled out into the mainstream. So...
I'm thinking of Hacker News, which went through an arc where it was really... This is the Y Combinator feed, which I read also religiously.
Yeah, it's great.
It's for geeks, geeky geeks.
It's pretty hardcore.
Yeah, it's very hardcore. And that's why I love it, by the way. And it went through a period of time where it was getting spammed and stuff. And I don't know if they programmatically solved it or they solved it with human attention. Probably a little of both.
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Because it's better now.
The thing I love about Hacker News is it looks like something that someone wrote.
It looks hacked.
In their lunchtime.
And so does Reddit. And maybe that's a good thing. Maybe you don't want to be too polished.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's, you know, and it's difficult when we have this at the Community Leadership Summit every year where, when you have lots and lots of different people, there's only so deep you can go in conversation.
Yeah.
And I think you have that with communities.
Maybe you should split off, when you get too big, split off into a smaller community.
Into smaller groups.
Yeah.
Because, it's like what...
There's a Dunbar number for community. It's not 150, but there is some magic number.
I think there is, yeah. And I think that's one of the things that we're figuring out now in the community leadership world is how do we do that? One of the things I've been thinking a lot about recently is how do you effectively track what success is and what great contribution is.
You need a metric.
Because it comes in multiple different forms.
Yeah.
Like there's I don't know if you guys know a guy called Jeff Atwood. Mm-hmm. There's a site called Stack Exchange.
That I know very well. Love Stack Exchange.
So Jeff Atwood was one of the
architects. That's a great
of it.
community.
And he's basically rebuilding the notion of forums. And it's
Coding Horror, I do know.
Yeah, and he's built this platform. Him and obviously his community have built this platform called Discourse, which is an unbelievable forum. One of the things I love about that is they have these trust levels, and these are like essentially different ways of determining how committed someone is to the forum. And it's formed from multiple different
metrics. That's interesting.
Points. So you've got, how many times you post and how many times you've been liked and whether you filled your profile. And
it's kind of a karma thing that you build.
It's from multiple different vantage points. Yeah. So it gives it real authenticity. And I would like to explore how do we do that for the wider community stratosphere.
Some sort of reputation score.
Yeah, but something that's based upon, if you do it based upon one metric, it's too narrow. It's multiple different perspectives, multiple different.
I think that's very interesting. And then you publish that reputation score next to the person's name. That's part of their name.
And then that can determine, for example, how involved people are in
our chat room.
Yeah. There's a lot of people.
We could have a little number next to your name. People would hate that. So you said something really important, too, which is if you don't have time to manage and monitor a community, don't start one.
Yeah.
Because a neglected community is guaranteed to go south.
Yeah, I think having, some people in the technology world don't like the term community manager. They prefer community gardener.
It is like a garden.
And it is like a garden. Like, there's a lot of merit to that term because if you don't provide the adequate level of care and feeding, it will wither on the vine and it will die.
Or worse, weeds will take over.
Right.
And that's the other problem is that when weeds come in, it pushes out the good stuff.
Yeah.
It's the biker bar analogy. At some point, you lose the community because the people you want don't enjoy the community anymore and they leave.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then all you've got left is weeds.
Yeah. And it's interesting because, one of the things I've learned is that there are not that many personalities out there who have that kind of natural, I don't know what the word is, that natural sense of leadership and let's just get on with it kind of mentality.
Right.
Like most people in the world need someone to help guide them and give them something to do that they can move forward. Like lots of people will help and lots of people will participate. But there's a very unique set of personalities that have that kind of like, let's just get on with it and do it thing. And every community needs people like that. When those people don't exist, you just get a bunch of people in an echo chamber.
Yeah, they're just wandering aimlessly.
Yeah.
So leadership is important.
Leadership
as well
is critical.
as well as gardening.
Leadership and gardening. They fight crime.
That's his skill. And if you haven't read The Art of Community or you don't know anything about the Community Management Forum, this would be Community Leadership. What is it called?
Community Leadership Forum.
Leadership Forum. You should go right now to artofcommunityonline.org, get the book, sign up for the forum, become part of this. There's so much to learn. This is a brand new arena, and I think it's just really exciting. I feel like that this understanding community is a skill. If you wanted a soft skill that would help you in life, this would be it. This would be a great one to have.
Well, the thing I love about it as well is because we're at the beginning of this and we're still figuring this stuff out, there is so much opportunity for us to fail in a great and graceful way. And, and that's what I love is that we build these presumptions around how things work, and then you realize that your presumptions were completely out of whack.
Yeah.
And you try things and they work, and you try things and they don't work. And to me, this is how we evolve what we do as humans. And I am convinced that we can get this down to a recipe, get this down to a science, in the same way that there will be a handbook somewhere about how you make a movie and how you build a car and how you make a television set. It won't necessarily make the very best car, but it'll give you a way of getting most of the way there. And I think that we can build that handbook getting all the way to being the best is years of trial and error and practice. But I think when we figure that out and we can get that information packaged, the impact on the world will be tremendous.
So good to see you again. You still doing any podcasts, any lug radio stuff? Or?
Yeah, we're doing a podcast called Bad Voltage, which is...
What's the topic?
Which is basically 4 idiots talking about technology.
I love it.
And we're doing some live shows as well.
Fun. Badvoltage.org if you want to know more about that.
Yeah. So we liken ourselves to Top Gear for technology.
That's
what we're going for.
Awesome.
Old Top Gear, not new Top Gear.
Old Top Gear.
Like the new Top
Gear.
Jeremy
Clarkson,
Hammond, and
pop
me.
somebody in the nose. Top Gear. I'll show you. You bring me a sandwich. That kind of Top Gear.
Little violent Top Gear. That's what we're all about.
It's heavy metal Top Gear.
Heavy metal Top Gear.
Badvoltage.org. Jono, great to see you.
Great to see you.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited about this topic.
Yeah, thank you.
I think we should continue the conversation. We'll do it online in the chat room. irc.twit.tv. If you would like to be here for every show, we would like that. We do it 11 a.m. on Monday mornings at Pacific time, 2 p.m. Eastern, 1800 UTC on Twit. I'd love seeing you here because the chat room is a big part of this show. But if you can't be here live, on demand, audio and video always available. All of our shows at twit.tv, in this case, twit.tv/TRI or youtube.com/ is it Triangulation Show or Triangulation? I can't remember. And of course, the best way to do it is subscribe in your favorite podcast app because that way you'll get every week. And there's always something interesting. This is a meaty show, a chewy show. This is a show, this is no filet mignon. We're talking flank steak, baby. Thanks for joining us. Thanks to our producer, Jason Howell, the technical director, and of course, Karsten Bondi, who helps find great guests like Jono Bacon. We'll see you next time on Triangulation. Bye-bye.